Hey everyone, my name is Rooster, and welcome back to Mechabellum. In today's video, I'm going to be highlighting the new Land Cruiser tech on the Wraith, aka the Roomba. And I'll be doing it from Elite Spec. And as you will see, one of the best cards, probably the best card to try and go for this comp, is going to show up very early on to make everything possible. Up against Lapis, who is a very, very strong player, kind of been on the up and coming, and I've been facing him a lot recently on ladder. Now he starts with Hounds and Sabertooth, and he has a marksman spec to boot. Of course, I am elite spec in this case, and I start with Mustangs and Crawlers. Normally Mustang Crawler isn't the best opener, but I think on elite it's kind of alright because you get to buy double Void Eye, and Void Eye is still extremely powerful in the meta right now. I imagine some nerfs will follow pretty soon, but for the time being these are still a powerhouse, especially when you get those immediate level 2s. I decided to play on the left side because I didn't really want to push into that new magnetic barricade. I think the slowdown matters quite a lot for fast units like Crawler and Mustang, so I'd rather just push into this, anti-armor cannon because I don't have too many tanky units. I can easily distract it with the help of my Crawler, and then I should be able to overwhelm it with the Void Eyes and the Mustang. Now on the right side, I still have my anti-armor cannon. I sold out of my rapid fire cannon in the middle. I don't really need it, and looks like my opponent is going to be pushing on the right, so we have a bit of a crossfire situation here. We have Sabers with Hounds and picking up Crawlers, very standard stuff. He is a little bit more towards the middle in this case. I think usually you would see this being positioned a bit more towards the right, but I mean, both can have their advantages and disadvantages between, having more pressure from the corner to being a little bit more balanced and less clumped, therefore less vulnerable to spells. Tower will fall first for my opponent, but honestly, that tends to be a good thing. You kind of want to get the second and the fourth debuff in these crossfires rather than the first and the third, because much of the debuff will be spent traveling, as you can see. So this first debuff doesn't really matter. The second one tends to not matter too much either. Same thing. We're just very far apart, and we're going to spend that time traveling. Now here's where stuff will start to matter. Where is my team going? I say usually the fourth debuff is going to be most important, which will happen at some point, but I do need my units to stay alive. And right now, all of my units decided to go towards the middle and are getting chewed by these Hounds and Sabers. So it actually doesn't look good at all. And I guess my little rule of thumb there is not going to help whatsoever. I don't have any Mustangs left, and while I do get that fourth debuff, there's nothing left here to get rid of the Crawlers, and I will actually end up losing. So not an amazing first round here, but definitely salvageable. Crossfires are tricky. They really are. It's taken me a long time to get used to them, and I think I still kind of sometimes have to, learn stuff about them because they are very, very hard to predict with all of these debuffs. And I was talking about one of the best cards, but probably the best card for Wraith, at least if you're playing Elite Spec. And here it is, mass-produced Wraith. This card is exceptionally powerful. Even if you're not elite spec, it is fantastic. You only lose 20% attack and 20% HP, which is not that big of a deal. And importantly, you lose no range. A lot of these mass-produced cards will often be losing range, but that's not the case here. And that's really all that matters. You're still going to have plenty of attack value to one-shot Crawlers, and that's all you care about, honestly. And on top of that, I will be able to afford them much more easily. Whereas, otherwise I would have to spend 450 here on a level 2 Wraith, which just wouldn't be possible. At least it wouldn't be very easy to afford. Now, I decided to grab one immediately. I do sell out of my Chungus on the right side, and I decide to go for the Wraith, even though my opponent is a marksman spec, because I was kind of trying to test this new Land Cruiser tech. Maybe he keeps the marksman and gets baited into clicking anti-air, and then I can just send the Wraith to the ground. I already have a bunch of Mustangs on the field, so I don't have to worry too much about the lack of anti-air I would have by doing so. Surprisingly, Lapis decides to sell. I think that is definitely a bit of a mistake here. I know that the marksman is worth a lot of money and a lot of experience, so if it were to go down, I would likely, get a lot of experience, but at the same time, I am elite spec, so the levels don't matter too much, and I probably should be able to get them relatively easily anyway. I think it's worth keeping around when a card like mass-produced Wraith shows up to just see, is my opponent actually gonna go for it, and if they do, I probably will be happy to have it around. Now he just loses by default because there's no anti-air. There's just a fang pack on the left as a tower was leveled. And a couple of hounds were added alongside some chaff. But it's just not going to be enough. We can speed things up here. No anti-air. And I may even be able to keep some of my other units alive here, as that debuff is very good. I managed to clear all the crawlers, and now my Void Eyes are still around to help deal with these sabers. So, very successful round. Super happy about that. It's great when you buy a Wraith, and you can just, you know, get the round win and start scaling from there. Typically, Wraith is pretty good mid to late game, so that's what you need to get to. The early game is sometimes a little bit tricky. Round number 3, and we get unit reinforcements. Very happy about what I see here. Sledgehammers are fantastic for stalling. That's perfect. I could pick the Fire Badger as well, but sledgehammers are just that much better. 5 in a pack instead of 3. I get 2 deployments of them. I can't buy level 1 sledgehammers to begin with, so having those at level 1 is fantastic. I get a little bit more deployment value instead, and that really allows me to start trickling my army towards that right side, which we tend to call a staircase, because, you know, it kind of looks like one, and you taper your units down towards your other tower. I did pump a level into it last round instead of grabbing that bonus deployment, or well, I didn't have money for an extra deployment, so I used 100 that I had left for a fortification, and now I have the money to suddenly, you know, and the deployments to suddenly add on an entire army over here, right? Another Wraith, a Void Eye, and a Crawler alongside 2 Sledgehammers. That is a very serious defense. My opponent goes for the oil here alongside that Badger and does set it on fire, but the anti-air once again kind of lacking. He decides to buy a Farseer, which I think is generally a slightly better answer into Wraith if you're not into Marksman already, or especially if it's a bit later into the game. But you have to be careful here, right? Like, you do want to have an anti-air unit, but at the same time you have to start thinking, well, do I click AA? Or, you know, what happens when my opponent clicks Land Cruiser and the AA tech is completely neutralized? I think it's honestly fine to try and force that if you're not entirely sure whether your opponent wants to go for it. Especially in these type of aggressive situations, you do lose attack interval when you click the tech, and you are no longer able to hit air units. So you can try and force some plays just by clicking AA, guaranteeing that you know, kill the Wraith on that round. Maybe your opponent clicks Land Cruiser, but then you can start investing into your own air units perhaps a bit more, because, well, the Wraith will no longer be able to kill things like wasps. They'll have to buy something else for it. And either way, whether you like it or not, you're gonna have to kill that Wraith, and right now, it's just not quite possible. Wraith too tanky, manages to barely take out that Farseer, and as we speed things up here, I do manage to pick up around 3 as well. So at this point, I am very comfortable with my position. Efficient tech research shows up here on round 4. Great pickup when you haven't clicked any techs yet, and you're planning to click quite a few, which I was. I didn't mind going into multiple Wraith techs. The idea was to perhaps go into, you know, that ground tech, the Land Cruiser, then go into floating artillery array, and perhaps grab some techs as well on the Void Eyes here. Opponent goes for the efficient tech research as well. I guess I did have to think a little bit about underground threat, but it should be the efficient tech research at the end of the day. And yeah, we see Land Cruiser here picked immediately because I kind of wanted to test it. Did I need to do so? I guess not necessarily, but I did want a range tech, and if I had to go range enhancement and my opponent clicks AA and then I have to go Land Cruiser, it makes it that much harder to get it to floating artillery array. I much rather would go Land Cruiser into floating artillery array and then leave the range for maybe, you know, the late game when I have more money. Range as well, picked up on the Hounds here. I decided to pick up another Void Eye. As I mentioned, I do plan to play a bunch of Void Eyes here. I think the unit is still very, very good, and it has a great matchup against things like Hounds and Saber, so kind of a unit of choice and very affordable for Elite Specialist. Crawler on my flank here, not sure what that's supposed to do. I guess it's meant to pull away from the flank, or from the tower rather, and perhaps open up some possibilities, but I did fortify the tower, so I think it's a little bit of a wasted deployment in that sense. I do add a couple more chaff units as well myself, and I make sure to level the Void Eyes wherever I can. And yeah, I mean, looks like the Wraith is honestly doing pretty well. I will say sabers are decent into ground Wraith, but it's all about, you know, what does the rest of the comp look like, and currently it's sledgehammers and Void Eyes, which is really not something that the sabers like dealing with. At this point, I would say Lapis probably needs to get into some big air units. Something like a Raiden, which would do well into Void Eye and Sledge. Or, you know, perhaps even an Overlord. I think Overlord also has a good matchup into those units. And just kind of punish the fact that my Wraith is no longer airborne. Going Wasp could be an option too, but a little bit tricky perhaps. Now, round 5, again, great unit drop here for me. The one weakness that I have is my lack of anti-air, really. So we have both Phoenix and Marksman offered. I go for the Marksman. Level 2 should be plenty to deal with most air threats. And you get 3 deployments as well, so I get to just layer them, you know, everywhere on the board and cover all angles. So very, very happy with that. Opponent goes for Phoenix, as I said, right? Trying to perhaps punish my lack of anti-air, but the unit drop gave me something. And because of that, it frees up more space for me to level and tech the units I already had. So here comes Charge Shot on the Void Eyes. I pick it up because my opponent has leveled sabers, and I'm trying to get rid of them as quick as I can. More chaff now being picked up, so you can really see the board is starting to flesh out nicely. We have, you know, 4 crawlers here on the left, 3 on the right. And now I'm pretty happy with my chaff situation. Maybe I will want, you know, eventually like 1 more somewhere over here. Maybe 1 all the way on the left, but that's about it. Happy to meet that crawler on the flank, by the way, because I'm elite spec, so my crawler will easily win. And I also go for a missile here. It's meant to both kind of cover my flank in case something would show up in a shallow flank to make use of this deep flank, or it was meant to take out the Hound if nothing would show up and just cripple my opponent's chaff clearing ability right now. It's perfectly fine to go for these type of, you know, 1-round missiles when you're defending, because getting tempo will often make it a lot easier to win later on, right? All you need to do is stabilize, and at this point, arguably, we've already more than stabilized, and this is just adding insult to injury with those missiles, and yeah, really making it very tough on my opponent. I already have 3 Wraith, and of course they're blue. They are mass-produced, but you're not going to feel that too much, and there is just so much money freed up because of efficient tech research, mass-produced Wraith, and again, just nice unit drops, right? Really helping me defend the right side, and also making up for my lack of anti-air that perhaps could have been a problem. At this point, things are looking a bit tough here, perhaps, for Lapis. One of the things he could still try is go into Wasp. If I don't buy Mustangs, then that is one of my weaknesses. Now, that is something that I should know, of course, as I now pick up a improved firepower control system. Great item for Wraith, great item as well for Mustang. And there's maybe a window here to go for Wasp, as I mentioned, to try and bully my marksman and get around win. After that, I mean, I'm not too sure what you want to get into. I still think Raiden here is likely one of the better responses, but it is a bit scary when I already have the marksman on the board. But, you know, as long as you can protect it with your crawlers, your hounds, your sabers, Raiden still looks like the best option, because you just have to find a way to get through all of this. Another option maybe could be Hacker, but I don't think Hacker is particularly great into things like Void Eye, and it will get outranged at some point. I already managed to get a second tech on the Wraith, so I decided to go Floating Artillery Array. Land Cruiser, again, gives 50 range, so you're already sitting very cozy at 110. And the one downside is that it loses, or increases attack interval, rather. So you really want to get those extra guns going to make up for perhaps your slower chaff clear that you would have. And then range is something you can click eventually if you feel like your Wraith is in trouble and, you know, gets killed before the rest of your board does. Very, very heavy flanks now. So as I said, right, I was expecting something like this to eventually show up. I'm perfectly happy to keep punishing this Hound in the open, because that's one of the 2 chaff clear units my opponent has. He does shield on that right side, but there was a electromagnetic impact offered, which my opponent picks up. Now, I didn't play around this whatsoever. I just wanted to flesh out my board even more, as I mentioned, right? More crawlers here. Picking up another Void Eye and going for that double tech on the Wraith, and I get punished for it accordingly. Wraith loses its techs, therefore becomes airborne, and that makes it possible for the Farseer to shoot at them. That is perhaps one interaction that also can counter the Wraith, is managing to EMP it. I've actually seen melters do quite well into them with that EMP barrage tech, as you just need to hit them once, and then when you do, it turns into a normal Wraith with very little range, being airborne, getting in front of all of your other units, and it dies before it often can recover. So that perhaps is another way to go about things, but can be tricky, of course, if you're playing an aggressive comp. Void Eye EMP, another, you know, kind of staple counter to Wraith, but it often only works for one round. And when I'm sitting at 4k hit points, it's not worth trying to rely on that. You're just not going to get the consistency. Even EMP Melter here would be, you know, down the line perhaps a problem, because Void Eyes are great once I range them into Melter, and I can always just buy Farseer with Photon Coating if I really, really need to. Round number 7, Wasp Swarm shows up. I'm perfectly happy to pick that. Try and deal with that flank a bit quicker. And here I pick up Mustang because, again, that's my one weakness, right? This is something that you should try and do when you're defending, or any time you're ahead, really. Try and think, hey, like, how does my opponent make a comeback here? Because you're already winning, so they have to do something. And right now, I felt really comfortable about my situation. The only thing I could see that could perhaps win a round for my opponent is him heavily committing to Wasp. So I'm happy to go for Mustangs with range. Generally speaking, Mustangs are fantastic in the mid to late game with some levels with a range tech, and I now have the resources to afford that. I also go for range on my Void Eyes, and we are making great use of the efficient tech research here. Already 5 techs picked up across the board. That means we have made 100 profit, and yeah, I'm feeling good about the whole situation here. Deeper investment into the flank, so opponents here really trying to attack as much as possible as they can over on that side of things. They do add 2 sabers on the left side. Side armaments, alright. When you do have the levels, I guess it's a fine thing to pick up. It will one-shot my level 1 sledgehammers, and it can do some decent damage against the Void Eyes. But generally speaking, once I click range, which I now do, you get heavily outranged. That tech only has 95 meters of range, and the Void Eyes have 140, so it is a bit of a tough matchup. Also, that was a very, very loud spell. I feel like that's been happening a couple of times on the new patch. It's as if you're sitting inside of that spell. Void Eyes, as you can see, damage just through the roof. Very easily taking out the opponent's sabers. The left side, I will say, did very well, as a temp range was picked up, and this does also affect the side armaments, or in case you were wondering. It's the only range tech, or a bonus range kind of effect, that does that. Laser sight, range enhancement, all of that doesn't work, but the temp range on the tower does. Right side will fall, and it's not a minor, or it's not a major victory for us, but looks like we still will be able to get it. My opponent gets slowed down by the oil they put down, and I managed to take down the shield as well. So economically speaking, we're in a great spot here, right? My opponent used some spells and is still on the back foot. And now round number 8, another improved firepower control system shows up. We just pick it. And at this point, I mean, there's not much left to be done, right? I can decide to go for something like suppression shot on my Void Eyes. Extremely cheap tech, 450 with the efficient tech research, and can just annoy the opponent's unit even more by reducing their range whenever they get hit. I could go for range enhancement on my Wraith as well. And my opponent kind of has to throw some Hail Marys here. Perhaps try and go for something like a Titan at this point, right? I think Raiden maybe could have worked if he decided to go into it a bit earlier. But the way that this game has gone so far has been a little bit rough, for sure. Now, he finds a spell on round 8 with the Acid Blast. And again, I'm a little, you know, overzealous here, perhaps, but going through the cards too quickly. I saw improved firepower. I click it, and I didn't really see that there was an Acid Blast. So I do not shield, and I will get punished for it, right? All of my units will be sitting inside of that acid. As mentioned, instead, I go for suppression shots. Incredibly cheap. Way too cheap, probably, of a tech, if we're being completely honest. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of just going to be my round. I just staircase, even more Void Eyes in the mix, and perfectly happy with how things are looking here. Another flank shows up on the bottom left. That should only pull my Mustang and my Crawler, so it's a nice find by my opponent. With the armor on the Hounds as well, you might be able to stop my Hound or my Mustangs a little bit. But with that being said, I have a ton of Void Eyes, and my Wraith also deals plenty of damage to get through all of that. And just look at these Void Eyes right now. Getting the insta-locks on the Sabers, taking down a level 4 as if it's nothing, and just really bullying the enemy board. Now, what I could see is that my Wraith was getting in front of the rest of my units, and so the next tech I was looking to get was something like the range enhancement to really make sure that they would stay safe. But overall here, things are looking great, and now, you know, barring something like armored Phantom Rays that are very high level, I think that there's very little that my opponents can do. This comp is just ultra solid, and it kind of showcases you guys as well, like what type of comp would be able to get made from this new tech. Of course, with the help of the Void Eyes, which are still extremely powerful. Round number 9, unit reinforcement show up. As I mentioned, high level Phantom Ray in the mix. Again here, right, you have to think, what is my opponent going to pick? Is there anything that I'm weak into? Rhino, I don't care about. I have charge shot, high level Void Eyes. Same thing really with the Melter and the Fortress. I don't think those will achieve much. So all I have to do here is just AA my marksman preemptively. It doesn't matter if he doesn't go for it, because I feel like with the board I have, I can beat anything else that may show up. So this is just a completely fine situation to click AA marksman. And there you go, right? It is the most logical drop for him to pick. One on the flank, one on the main board, trying to block my Mustangs from doing anything, but thankfully I went for the tech. My marksmen instantly lock on, and the flank doesn't even stand a chance. I did also range my Wraith. We go for the shields this time so we don't get EMP'd, and things are looking really good. Now my opponent is managing to walk in a good bit, but I mean, maybe something like range on the Sabers would have helped a bit earlier, but at this point it's just, yeah, a real nightmare to try and get through all of these Void Eyes. He does a decent job, but keep in mind the acid would have been removed after this round, and basically all of our bases are covered right now, so we do manage to take a win. Relatively one-sided match, I would say, but I wanted to showcase it because it's a good example of what type of board you would be looking to play and what situation this tech can shine in, right? So getting mass-produced Wraith early, especially when paired with something like Void Eyes or Sledges, can be exceptionally powerful. I think it can even work in standard, in long-range matches if you want to. You'd be looking to get triple tech eventually. You have to be a bit careful about your anti-air, but as long as you have a couple marksmen, as long as you have a few Mustangs here and there, you should be completely fine. The tech order, I think if you're playing aggro, you likely want to just go maybe range Wraith first and kind of see if your opponent is willing to commit to an AA tech. If you go range and then land cruiser, I don't like that as much. So if you're really playing aggressive, I think you still want to go range and 8-gun. Try to protect your Wraith with stuff like Wasp and Crawlers, and then only in the late game, try to get the third tech when the AA really gets out of control. In this scenario, I clicked it early because I felt like my opponent was going to go for something like aerial specialization, and I kind of wanted to test it, right? Mass-produced Wraith, I had the money, and in this scenario, I was completely fine clicking it because I knew I could get away with Land Cruiser into Floating Artillery Array. I didn't really need to have the range until this very turn, right? Round number 9. I hope you guys liked this. If you did, please leave a thumbs up, and let me know down in the comments what you think about the new tech. Have you been playing a lot of Land Cruiser or facing it? What are your thoughts? Let me know. If you want to stay up to date with my latest content, please consider subscribing. And if you want to see me play live, check me out on Twitch. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.